I was scraping burnt oatmeal from the bottom of my favorite saucepan when my daughter Melissa burst through my kitchen door without knocking, her face flushed, and her designer purse clutched against her chest like armor. "Mum, I need you to co-sign a loan for $35,000, she announced, not even bothering with hello. The bank won't approve me without a co-signer, and Dad already said no. The steel wool slipped from my hand and clattered into the sink. I turned to face my 31-year-old daughter, taking in her perfectly styled blonde highlights and the new diamond studs glinting in her ears, the ones I was pretty sure hadn't been there last month when she'd borrowed $200 for groceries. $35,000, I repeated, my voice catching slightly. For what? A business opportunity. This amazing woman I met at yoga is starting a wellness center, and she needs investors. Mom, this could be huge for me. I could finally have my own thing, independence. The morning October light slanted through my kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing between us. I could smell the lingering scent of the apple cinnamon candle I'd lit earlier, trying to cover the burnt oatmeal smell. And somewhere in the distance, Mrs. Patterson's dog was barking at the mailman like he did every single day at 10:15. "Honey, sit down," I said, gesturing toward the small table where I'd been reading the paper with my coffee. "Let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about, Mom. I just need you to sign the papers. It's not like you'll actually have to pay anything. I'll be making the payments myself once the business takes off." I dried my hands on the dish towel, a faded blue one that had been a wedding gift 28 years ago, back when I thought marriage would last forever, and that good intentions were enough to solve any problem. The familiar weight of my wedding ring, which I still wore out of habit more than sentiment, reminded me of all the financial decisions I'd made trying to keep other people happy. "Melissa, please sit down." She remained standing, shifting her weight from one expensive boot to the other. "Why are you being weird about this? You co-signed for my car 2 years ago. That was different. You needed reliable transportation for work. This is work too. Better than work, it's an investment in my future." I pulled out a chair and sat down myself, hoping she'd follow suit. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. Through the window, I could see my neighbor Harold raking leaves in his front yard, methodically working his way across the brown grass in straight, neat lines. "Tell me more about this business opportunity," I said. "What kind of wellness center?" Melissa's eyes lit up and she finally sat down, setting her purse on the table with a soft thud. "It's incredible, Mom. Crystal therapy, sound healing, aromatherapy, meditation classes." "Veronica, that's the woman I met. She has all these certifications and connections. She says the wellness industry is booming, especially with people our age, realizing they need to take better care of themselves. People our age, like millennials and Gen X. People who are stressed out and need healing." I nodded slowly, though something cold was settling in my stomach. "And how did you meet Veronica?" "At yoga class. She was doing this amazing workshop on chakra alignment, and afterward we got to talking. She's been looking for the right business partner, someone young and enthusiastic who can bring fresh energy to the project." "Partner, I thought you said investor." "Well, both. I'd be investing in the business, but I'd also be working there. Maybe eventually managing the whole place if it goes well." The kitchen clock ticked steadily above the sink, marking off seconds that felt heavier than they should. I'd learned to pay attention to that cold feeling in my stomach over the years, especially since my divorce 3 years ago. It was the same feeling I'd had when my ex-husband had wanted to refinance the house to invest in his brother's restaurant, and when my eldest son had asked me to loan him money for a sure-thing cryptocurrency venture. "Have you seen a business plan?" I asked. "Financial projections, information about the location they're planning to lease." Melissa's enthusiasm flickered slightly. "Veronica has all that stuff. She's super professional. She said once I commit to the investment, she'll show me everything. But we have to move fast because someone else is interested in the same space. Sweetheart, that's not how legitimate business investments work. You need to see all the documentation before you commit any money." "Mom, God, you're being so paranoid. Not everything is a scam. Some people are just trying to build something positive in the world." I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Her skin was soft and warm, and I remembered when those hands had been small enough to disappear completely in my palm. I'm not saying it's a scam. I'm saying you need to be careful. $35,000 is a lot of money. She pulled her hand away. It's not a lot of money to you. You got half of everything in the divorce. You could write a check right now and not even notice it was gone. The words stung partly because they weren't entirely untrue. The divorce settlement had left me financially stable, though not wealthy. But it had also taught me the value of that stability, the importance of protecting it. That's not the point, Melissa. The point is that I worked 30 years to build that security, and I'm not going to risk it on something that sounds like something your stupid daughter would fall for. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the linoleum. I should have known you'd react this way. You've never believed in me, never supported my dreams. That's not fair, and you know it. I supported you through college. I helped you with your apartment deposit when you moved to Chicago. I've been there for you every time you've needed help, only when it was something you approved of, something safe and boring and small. The accusation hung in the air between us, sharp and familiar. We'd had variations of this conversation so many times over the years, about her college major, her choice of boyfriends, her decision to move back home after Chicago didn't work out the way she'd hoped. I support you, I said quietly, but I also love you too much to enable you to make a mistake that could hurt you financially for years. So that's it. You're just going to say no without even meeting Veronica or learning more about the opportunity. I took a deep breath, tasting the lingering sweetness of the cinnamon candle. I'm saying I need more information, real information, and I need time to think about it. There is no time. I told you we have to move fast. Then maybe this isn't the right opportunity. Melissa's face flushed deeper, and I could see the little muscle in her jaw twitching the way it had when she was 5 years old, and trying not to cry after skinning her knee. Fine. Thanks for nothing, Mum. I guess I'll figure it out myself like I always do. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, but paused with her hand on the knob. You know what? Maybe Dad was right to say no too. Maybe you both just want to keep me dependent on you so you can feel important. Melissa, but she was already gone, the door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. I sat alone in my kitchen, listening to her car start up and pull away, with an aggressive squeal of tires. The silence that followed felt heavy and familiar. It was the same silence that had filled the house after my divorce was finalized, when the weight of making all my own decisions had felt both terrifying and liberating. The same silence that came after difficult conversations with my aging mother, who lived in a senior community 40 minutes away, and called every few days with increasingly unreasonable demands for my time and attention. I got up and finished washing the oatmeal pan, scrubbing harder than necessary at the stubborn burnt bits. Through the window, I could see Harold had finished with his front yard and moved on to the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street, still maintaining those precise, methodical lines. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my friend Carol. Book club tonight, still on. I'm making my famous spinach dip. I smiled despite myself and typed back, wouldn't miss it. I'll bring wine. The October afternoon stretched ahead of me, golden and quiet. I had errands to run, groceries to buy, and a new novel to finish before tonight's discussion. Normal everyday things that felt grounding after the storm of Melissa's visit. But I knew this wasn't over. With Melissa, it never was. 3 hours later, I was loading grocery bags into my car when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw my ex-husband's name. Hello, David. Linda, we need to talk about Melissa. I shifted the phone to my other ear and closed the trunk with more force than necessary. Let me guess. She called you upset because I wouldn't co-sign her loan. She's crying, Linda. She says you called her stupid and told her she has terrible judgment. I did not say that. I said I needed more information about the business before I'd consider co-signing for $35,000. $35,000? She told me it was 20. I paused, my hand still on the trunk. She told you 20,000. Yeah, for some kind of wellness business. Look, I know you're trying to protect her, but she's an adult. Maybe we should at least meet with this business partner of hers. David, she just told you it was $20,000. She told me 35. Don't you think that's a red flag? Silence on the other end. Then, maybe she just got confused. You know how she is with numbers. I wanted to scream. Even after 3 years of divorce, David still had this maddening ability to make excuses for behavior that should concern him. It was one of the reasons I'd finally left his inability to see problems until they exploded in his face. She's not confused about numbers when it comes to asking for money, I said. And the fact that she gave us different amounts tells me she's trying to manipulate one of us into saying yes. You're being awfully cynical, Lynn. I'm being realistic, which is why I'm still financially stable, and you had to take out a second mortgage last year to pay for Brett's legal bills. It was a low blow, and I regretted it as soon as the words left my mouth. Our oldest son's DUI had been expensive and embarrassing for all of us, but it wasn't David's fault. That was different, David said quietly. Brett needed help, real help. And I'm not saying Melissa doesn't need help. I'm saying this particular request raises some serious red flags, and we need to be smart about how we respond. So what do you want to do? I climbed into my car and started the engine, letting the familiar sounds of the Honda settling around me. I want to meet this Veronica person. I want to see a real business plan, financial projections, references from other investors. I want to understand exactly what Melissa thinks she's getting into, and if it all checks out, then we'll talk about it. But David, if Melissa is lying to us about the amount, what else might she be lying about? Another pause. She's been struggling since she moved back from Chicago. Maybe she's just desperate to find something that makes her feel successful. I know that, and I love her. But love doesn't mean enabling poor decisions. All right, he said finally. I'll call her back and tell her we both want to meet with this Veronica before anyone signs anything. Good. And David, next time she asks you for money, check with me first. We need to be consistent. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. After I hung up, I sat in the grocery store parking lot for a few minutes, watching other people load their cars and navigate the simple everyday business of their lives. An elderly woman struggled with a heavy bag, and a younger man hurried over to help her. A mother with 2 small children managed an overflowing cart while juggling a phone call. Normal people dealing with normal problems. I thought about Melissa at 31, still bouncing between jobs and dreams and financial crises. I thought about my own mother, who at 78 seemed to believe that my primary purpose in life was to manage her medical appointments and social calendar. I thought about David still trying to solve problems by throwing money at them. And I thought about the conversation I'd had with my therapist 6 months ago about learning to love people without feeling responsible for fixing their lives. The drive home took me past the coffee shop where Melissa worked part-time through the downtown area, where she'd grown up riding her bike to friends' houses and later learned to drive in my old Camry. The October light was starting to fade, painting everything in soft gold and amber, and I found myself remembering the young woman who'd called me from Chicago 2 years ago, sobbing because her roommate had moved out unexpectedly, and she couldn't afford the rent alone. I'd wired her money that same day. $500, then another $300 2 weeks later, then the money for her security deposit when she decided to move back home. Each time telling myself it was temporary help, that she just needed to get back on her feet. But maybe David was right about one thing. Maybe she was desperate to feel successful. And maybe I'd been so focused on protecting her from consequences that I'd never given her the chance to learn from them. My phone buzzed with another text this time from Melissa. Talk to Dad. You guys can meet Veronica Thursday at 7 p.m., Starbucks on Main Street. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Sounds good. Looking forward to learning more about the opportunity. She responded immediately. Thank you. I know you're going to love her. I hope she was right. But either way, I was going to trust my instincts and ask the hard questions. Because loving my daughter meant being honest with her even when honesty was uncomfortable. By the time I got home, the sun was setting behind the oak trees, in my backyard, casting long shadows across the small garden I'd planted last spring. I carried my groceries inside and began putting them away, moving through the familiar rhythms of my kitchen. Pasta in the pantry, yogurt in the refrigerator, apples in the bowl on the counter. The house felt peaceful around me, filled with the accumulated comfort of 3 years of living alone and making my own choices. I'd painted the walls colors I loved, arranged the furniture the way I wanted it, and learned to enjoy the quiet that had once felt so terrifying. At 6:30, I walked the 4 blocks to Carol's house for book club, carrying a bottle of Pinot Grigio, and the novel we'd been discussing, a story about 3 generations of women learning to understand each other. The evening air was crisp and sweet-smelling of wood smoke and dying leaves. Carol's living room was already full when I arrived. Besides Carol herself, there was Margaret from the library, Susan, who taught high school English, Janet, who'd recently retired from nursing, and Emily, the youngest of our group at 43. Linda. Carol hugged me as I handed over the wine. Perfect timing. We were just getting started. I settled into my favorite chair, a worn leather recliner that Carol had inherited from her grandmother, and accepted a glass of wine and a small plate of spinach dip. "So," Margaret said, pushing her reading glasses up her nose, "what did everyone think about the mother-daughter relationship in this one? Because I have to say, it hit a little close to home." "In what way?" Susan asked. "My daughter's been after me to sell my house and move into one of those senior living places. She says I'm getting too old to maintain a 2-story house by myself, but honestly, I think she just wants me to be someone else's responsibility." Janet nodded emphatically. "My son's the same way. Every time I mention a minor health issue, he starts talking about assisted living facilities, as if turning 65 automatically makes me incompetent." "It's interesting," Emily said, "because in the book it's the daughter who's trying to establish boundaries with her mother. Usually we hear about it the other way around, adult children who can't break free." I took a sip of wine and thought about Melissa, about the cycle of financial crises and emotional drama that seemed to define our relationship. "Sometimes I think we make it too easy for our kids to stay dependent on us," I said. "We think we're being loving, but maybe we're actually preventing them from growing up." "Speak for yourself," Carol laughed. "My kids are so independent they barely call me anymore. I'd love for one of them to need me occasionally." "Be careful what you wish for," I said, and then found myself telling them about Melissa's visit that morning, about the business loan, and the different amounts she'd told her father and me. "Oh, honey," Margaret said when I finished, "that's tough, but you're absolutely right to ask questions before you sign anything. The thing is," I said, "I want to support her dreams. I don't want to be the dream-crushing mother who never believes in her kids. But $35,000 is $35,000, Janet finished. And if she's not being honest about the details, that's a huge red flag. Maybe she really believes in this opportunity," Emily suggested. "Maybe she's not trying to deceive you so much as convince you." "Same difference," Susan said bluntly. "If she can't be straightforward about the facts, she's not ready to handle a business investment." We talked about it for another few minutes and then moved on to discussing the novel itself. But throughout the evening, I found myself thinking about the questions my friends had raised. Was I being too cautious, too cynical? Or was I finally learning to trust my own judgment after years of second-guessing myself? When I walked home later, the streets were quiet, except for the sound of my footsteps on the sidewalk. Most of the houses had their porch lights on, glowing warm and welcoming in the darkness. I thought about all the lives unfolding behind those lit windows, people dealing with their own complicated relationships and difficult decisions. The next morning, Melissa called while I was having coffee on my back porch, wrapped in a fleece blanket, and watching the squirrels raid my bird feeder. "Mum, I'm sorry about yesterday," she said without preamble. "I was stressed and I took it out on you. Apology accepted. I'm sorry, too, for some of the things I said. You didn't say anything wrong. I know this whole thing seems risky to you." I wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders and watched a red cardinal land on the fence post. "It's not just that it seems risky, sweetheart. I'm concerned about some of the details." "Like what?" "Like the fact that you told your father the loan was for $20,000. Silence on the other end. Then, "Oh, that." "Yes, that. I knew Dad would freak out about the higher amount, so I thought I'd start with the smaller number and work up to it." "Melissa, that's not how honesty works in a family. If you can't trust us with the real information, how can you expect us to trust you with our financial support?" "You're right. I know you're right. I was just scared you'd both say no without even hearing about the opportunity. Well, now we're going to hear about it. Thursday night, remember, but honey, I need you to promise me that from now on, you'll be completely honest with both your father and me. No more strategic editing of the facts. I promise, and Mom, thank you for agreeing to meet Veronica. I really think you're going to like her. After we hung up, I sat on the porch for a while longer, thinking about promises and second chances, and the fine line between support and enabling. The morning was beautiful, crisp and bright with that particular quality of light that October brings to the Midwest. I could hear Mrs. Patterson's dog barking at something in her backyard and the distant sound of a lawnmower from somewhere down the street. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Doctor's appointment this afternoon. Pick me up at 1:30. Not a request, not a would you mind or if you're available. Just an assumption that I would rearrange my schedule to accommodate hers the way I'd been doing for the past 2 years since she'd given up driving. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "What time is your appointment? I have a commitment this afternoon, but might be able to work something out." She called immediately. "What commitment? You're retired." "I'm not retired, Mum. I'm working part-time at the real estate office, remember, and I have other responsibilities too. More important than your mother's health. The familiar guilt trip deployed with surgical precision. I'd fallen for it so many times over the years that it had become automatic, the immediate rush of shame, the scramble to rearrange my life to meet her expectations. "What's the appointment for?" I asked. "Routine checkup. Dr. Martinez wants to review my blood pressure medication." "Mum, you've been to routine checkups by yourself for 78 years. This one doesn't require a chauffeur. I don't like driving downtown anymore. The traffic makes me nervous. Then take the senior center shuttle. It runs twice a day to the medical plaza. Linda, I shouldn't have to ride with a bunch of strangers. You're my daughter." And there it was, the central assumption that had governed our relationship for as long as I could remember. Because I was her daughter, my time and energy and emotional bandwidth belonged to her by default. Because I was unmarried and childless, never mind that I'd raised 2 children and had simply chosen not to have more, my life was presumably less important, less busy, less valid than other people's. "Mum, I love you and I'm happy to help with genuine emergencies or important medical issues, but I can't be your personal transportation service for routine appointments. It's not sustainable, and it's not healthy for either of us." "Fine," she said, her voice cold and clipped. "I'll figure it out myself. I always do. I hope you will. Call me tonight and let me know how the appointment went." After I hung up, I sat very still for a few minutes, waiting for the familiar wave of guilt and second-guessing to wash over me. But instead, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Relief at having stated my boundaries, clearly and kindly, without apology or explanation. It was a feeling I thought I might want to get used to. Thursday evening came faster than I'd expected. I met David at the Starbucks 10 minutes early, wanting a chance to talk privately, before Melissa and her business partner arrived. "You look good," he said as I sat down across from him. "Rested." "Thank you. How's the new house?" "Good. Quiet. Still getting used to living alone again." We'd maintained a carefully polite relationship since the divorce united, by our concern for our children and our shared history, but no longer carrying the weight of disappointment and unmet expectations that had characterized the last years of our marriage. "David, before they get here, I want us to agree on something. No matter how persuasive this Veronica person is, we don't commit to anything tonight. We ask for documentation, we take time to think about it, and we make a decision together." "Agreed. And Linda, I think you were right about the different amounts she told us. I asked her about it yesterday, and she admitted she was trying to manage the situation." Manage the situation. Her words. She said she thought if she asked for the full amount right away, we'd both say no without listening. I sipped my latte and watched through the window as Melissa's car pulled into the parking lot. So she decided to manipulate us, instead of trusting us with the truth. "I think she's scared," David said quietly. "Scared of failing again, scared of disappointing us again. Maybe we haven't given her many opportunities to succeed. Maybe, but we also can't protect her from consequences forever." Melissa walked in, with a woman who looked to be in her early 40s, tall and blonde, with the kind of effortless style that suggested either natural confidence or careful cultivation. She wore a flowing scarf and multiple silver bracelets that jingled softly as she moved. "Mom, Dad, this is Veronica Chen," Melissa said, her voice bright with nervous energy. "Veronica, these are my parents." Veronica smiled warmly and extended her hand. "It's so wonderful to meet you both. Melissa has told me so much about you. We made small talk while getting coffee, the usual pleasantries about the weather and traffic." Veronica mentioned that she'd recently moved to town from California, drawn by the lower cost of living and the opportunity to start fresh in a smaller community. "So tell us about your business plan," David said once we were all settled at a corner table. Veronica's eyes lit up. "I'm so excited to share this with you. The wellness industry is absolutely booming right now, especially as people become more aware of the mind-body connection and the importance of holistic healing." She pulled out a sleek tablet and began showing us photos of meditation rooms and aromatherapy setups, talking enthusiastically about sound healing and crystal therapy and the growing market for alternative wellness services. "It sounds interesting," I said when she paused. "Do you have financial projections, information about startup costs, and expected revenue?" "Of course," Veronica said, but she didn't pull out any additional documents. "The numbers are very encouraging. Based on similar businesses in comparable markets, we're looking at breaking even within the first year and showing significant profit by year 2. "Can we see those projections?" David asked. "Absolutely. I have everything on my laptop at home. I can email you a full business plan tomorrow." I glanced at Melissa, who was watching Veronica with obvious admiration. What would Melissa's role be in the business? "Oh, she'd be my business partner," Veronica said. "Eventually, she could manage day-to-day operations while I focus on developing new programs and expanding our services." "And the investment amount?" I asked. "We want to make sure we're all talking about the same number." Melissa flushed slightly. "It's $35,000. I'm sorry I wasn't clear about that initially." "That's a significant investment," David said. "What exactly would that money cover?" "Startup costs," Veronica said smoothly. "First year's lease equipment, initial inventory, marketing, business licenses. It's actually quite reasonable for a business of this scope." "Have you identified a location?" I asked. "Yes, there's a perfect space in the downtown area. The owner is holding it for us, but we need to make a decision soon because there's another interested party." "Can we see the space?" David asked. "Unfortunately, it's not available for viewing until after we've made our commitment. The current tenant is still operating there and they need to maintain confidentiality." I felt that familiar cold sensation in my stomach. "You're asking for $35,000 for a space that no one can see. It's not unusual in commercial real estate," Veronica said, "especially in a competitive market. But I can show you photos." She pulled up more images on her tablet, a bright, airy space with hardwood floors and large windows. It looked lovely, but something about the whole situation was making me increasingly uncomfortable. "Veronica," I said, "can you give us some references, other investors or business partners you've worked with?" "This is my first venture in this market," she said, "but I have extensive experience in the wellness industry, and I've been studying business development for years." "So you haven't actually run a business before?" David asked. "Not independently, no, but I've worked for several wellness centers in California, and I have certifications in multiple healing modalities." We talked for another 20 minutes, but I found myself growing more skeptical with each answer. Veronica was charming and enthusiastic, but every specific question was met with vague responses or promises to provide information later. Finally, I looked at my watch. "I think we have enough information for tonight. Veronica, thank you for taking the time to meet with us. We'll need to see that business plan and financial documentation before we can make any decisions." "Of course," she said. "I'll send everything to Melissa tomorrow and she can forward it to you." After they left David and I sat in the nearly empty coffee shop processing what we'd just heard. "Well," he said finally, "what did you think?" "I think if I were looking for someone to invest $35,000 in my business, I'd come prepared with actual documentation, not just pretty pictures on an iPad." "Agreed." "And did you notice how she deflected every specific question?" "Yeah, no business plan, no financial projections, No references, can't see the location until after we commit money. It sounds like a scam, I finished. Or at best, someone who has no idea what she's doing but is very good at sounding confident. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us probably thinking about how to break this to Melissa without crushing her spirit entirely. She's going to be devastated, David said. Maybe, but she needs to learn to ask these questions herself before she gets emotionally invested in something. You're going to be the bad guy again. I'd rather be the bad guy than watch her lose $35,000 to someone who can't even produce a basic business plan. David sighed and ran his hand through his grey hair, a gesture I'd seen him make countless times during our marriage, when he was trying to solve a problem he couldn't quite grasp. What if we're wrong, he said. What if this is legitimate and we're just being overly cautious? Then Veronica will provide the documentation we've asked for, and we'll reconsider. But David, if this were a legitimate business opportunity, she would have come prepared with real information. She would have insisted that Melissa see the space before making any financial commitment. She would have references and a track record and a detailed plan for how our money would be used. You're right. I know you're right. It's just hard to disappoint our daughter. I know. But we're not the ones disappointing her. Veronica is by not being prepared to answer reasonable questions about a significant financial investment. We walked out to the parking lot together, and David gave me a quick hug before getting into his car. Thanks for pushing for this meeting, he said. I probably would have just said yes to make her happy. That's what you did with Brett and the cryptocurrency thing. Yeah, and look how that turned out. I drove home thinking about patterns and consequences, about the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. The downtown streets were quiet, most of the shops closed for the evening, their windows dark, except for the security lights, casting long shadows on the empty sidewalks. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and called my friend Carol. How did the meeting go? She asked immediately. I told her everything from Veronica's evasive answers to the lack of any real documentation. Oh, honey, Carol said when I finished. That poor girl, she's going to be so embarrassed when she realizes what almost happened. If she realizes, she might just think we're being unreasonable. Give her some credit. Deep down, she probably has some doubts herself. Sometimes we need other people to give us permission to trust our instincts. I hope you're right. What are you going to do now? Wait for the business plan that's never going to come, and then have a very difficult conversation with my daughter. We talked for a few more minutes, and then I went to bed early, exhausted by the emotional weight of the evening. But I slept better than I had in weeks, comforted by the knowledge that I'd asked the right questions and trusted my own judgment. Friday came and went with no business plan from Veronica. Saturday passed quietly, and on Sunday morning I was having coffee and reading the paper when Melissa called. Mom, can I come over? I need to talk to you about something. Of course, I'll put on another pot of coffee. She arrived 20 minutes later, looking younger than her 31 years, in jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. I heard from Veronica yesterday, she said without preamble. She said she's decided to go with the other investor, someone who was more ready to move quickly on the opportunity. I set down my coffee mug carefully. I'm sorry, sweetheart. That must be disappointing. The thing is, Melissa said, not meeting my eyes, I don't think I'm disappointed. I think I'm relieved. Why? Because after Thursday night, I started thinking about some of the things you and Dad asked, and I realized I didn't know the answers to any of them. I was so caught up in the idea of being a business owner that I never really looked at the details. She sat down at the kitchen table, in the same chair where she'd made her dramatic announcement just 5 days earlier. I called her Friday morning and asked for the business plan she'd promised to send. Melissa continued. She got really defensive and said that if I didn't trust her, maybe I wasn't the right partner for her vision. And what did you say? I said that wanting to see a business plan wasn't about trust, it was about being responsible with money. And then she said she'd already found someone who shared her vision more completely. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. How are you feeling about all this? Embarrassed mostly. And grateful that you and Dad asked the questions I should have been asking myself. You're not embarrassed about being cautious with a significant financial decision. No, I'm embarrassed about almost falling for what was probably a scam. and about trying to manipulate you and Dad with different amounts instead of just being honest about what I was considering. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the late morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen window and warming the space between us. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. How do you know when you're being appropriately cautious versus just being scared to take risks? It was a good question, the kind of question that showed she was really thinking about the situation rather than just reacting to it. I think it's about doing your homework, I said. Real risks come with real information. If someone is asking you to make a significant decision quickly, without giving you time to research and understand what you're getting into, that's usually a red flag. Veronica kept saying we had to move fast because of the other investor. Classic pressure tactic. Legitimate business opportunities don't disappear overnight because you ask reasonable questions. Melissa nodded slowly. I think I wanted it to be real so badly that I ignored all the warning signs. That's human nature, sweetheart. We all want to believe in the exciting opportunity, the shortcut to success. But usually, the things that seem too good to be true are exactly that. So what do I do now? I feel like I'm 31 years old, and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the impulsive young woman who'd burst into my kitchen demanding a co-signature, but someone who was beginning to ask herself the right questions. You take your time, I said. You figure out what you actually enjoy doing, what you're good at, what the market needs. And then you make a plan, based on real information, not just excitement and wishful thinking. Will you help me? Not with money, but with figuring out a real plan. I'd be honored to help you with that. She smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Thank you. And Mom, I'm sorry for all the drama this week. I know I put you in a difficult position. You don't need to apologize for having dreams, Melissa. You just need to learn to pursue them wisely. After she left, I called David to fill him in on the conversation. So no more business loan, he said. No more business loan, at least not for this particular venture. How's she taking it? Better than I expected. I think she was starting to have doubts herself. Good for her, and good for us for sticking to our guns. This time, I said. But David, we need to think about how we're going to handle these situations going forward. Because this won't be the last time one of our kids needs financial help or asks us to support a questionable decision. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we need some ground rules, some criteria for when we'll provide financial support and when we won't. Something we can both agree on ahead of time, so we're not making these decisions in the heat of the moment. That makes sense. Do you want to have lunch this week and talk about it? I'd like that. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the Sunday afternoon working in my garden, pulling up the dead tomato plants and preparing the beds for winter. The work was satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with success or failure, just the simple rhythm of clearing away what was finished and making space for what would come next. Monday morning brought a call from my mother. I wanted to thank you, she said, which was not what I'd expected to hear. For what? For making me take the shuttle to my doctor's appointment. I met the most interesting woman on the ride, and we ended up having lunch afterward. Turns out she lives in my building and has been looking for someone to play bridge with. That's wonderful, Mom. I hadn't realized how much I'd been depending on you for everything. It felt good to handle something myself. I smiled, thinking about boundaries and independence and the unexpected gifts that sometimes come from saying no. I'm proud of you, I said. Well, don't get carried away. I still expect you to drive me to my specialist appointments. The important ones, absolutely. But maybe we can work out a system where you use the shuttle for routine visits. Maybe, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. That evening I walked to book club again, enjoying the crisp October air and the sound of leaves rustling under my feet. The streets were quiet except for the occasional car and the distant sound of a television through someone's open window. At Carol's house, the conversation eventually turned to adult children and financial boundaries, probably because I'd shared the update about Melissa and the business loan. You did the right thing, Margaret said firmly. My nephew got caught up in one of those pyramid schemes a few years ago, and by the time his parents realized what was happening, he'd lost $15,000. The hard part, Emily said, is knowing when to help and when to step back. I mean, we want to support our kids, but we also want them to learn to be responsible adults. I think the key, Janet said, is helping them develop good decision-making skills rather than just rescuing them from bad decisions. Easier said than done. Susan laughed. My son's been asking me to co-sign for a new car, and every time I start to say yes, I remember what happened with his last car loan. We talked about it for a while, sharing stories and strategies, and I realized how valuable it was to have friends who understood the complexities of loving adult children without enabling them. Walking home later, I felt grateful for the community I'd built over the past few years. Friends who listened without judgment, who shared their own struggles and wisdom, who reminded me that I wasn't alone in navigating these difficult relationships. The following Thursday, I had lunch with David at a small restaurant downtown. We spent the first half of the meal catching up on work and mutual friends, and then turned to the conversation we'd planned to have. So, he said, ground rules for financial support. I pulled out a small notebook where I'd been jotting down thoughts throughout the week. I've been thinking about this and I have some ideas. Let's hear them. First, no major financial decisions made under pressure. If someone needs money immediately for a genuine emergency, that's one thing. But any request for significant financial support gets at least a week of consideration. Define significant. More than $1,000. Agreed. What else? Second, any business investment or loan co-signing requires complete documentation. Business plans, financial projections, references, site visits. If they can't provide that information, the answer is automatically no. Makes sense. Anything else? Third, we need to distinguish between helping with genuine needs versus enabling poor choices. Groceries and rent, yes. Luxury items and questionable investments, no. David nodded thoughtfully. What about education, if one of the kids wants to go back to school? I think that depends on whether they have a realistic plan for how the education will improve their career prospects. A nursing degree, yes. A master's in medieval poetry, probably not. You're tough, he said, but he was smiling. I'm realistic, and I think we owe it to our kids to be realistic too. We talked for another hour, working out the details of what we'd support and what we wouldn't, how we'd communicate with each other about financial requests, and how we'd present a united front to our children. You know, David said as we were getting ready to leave, I think this might have been harder when we were married. We were so focused on not disagreeing in front of the kids that we never really worked out a consistent approach. Maybe divorce has some unexpected benefits, I said. We can be partners in parenting without having to navigate all the other complications of marriage. To successful co-parenting, he said, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. To healthy boundaries, I replied. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a routine that felt more balanced than anything I'd experienced in years. Work at the real estate office 3 days a week, time with friends, regular phone calls with my children that didn't revolve around crisis management, and quiet evenings at home with books and crossword puzzles. Melissa started seeing a career counselor and began exploring opportunities in nonprofit management, something that combined her people skills with her desire to make a meaningful contribution. She seemed more focused and less frantic, though I suspected she was still struggling with the gap between her dreams and her current reality. My mother called one evening to tell me about her new bridge group and ask if I wanted to join her for dinner sometime soon, not because she needed transportation, but because she missed our conversations when they weren't centered around her appointments and errands. I'd love that, I said. Let's pick a restaurant we can both walk to. Or we could cook dinner at my place, she suggested. I've been wanting to try that new cookbook Janet gave me. It was such a small thing, but it felt significant, the offer to cook for me, instead of expecting me to cook for her. The acknowledgement that our relationship could be reciprocal rather than one-sided. One Saturday morning in early November, I was raking leaves in my front yard when Harold came over from next door. Linda, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right? You seem lighter lately, if that makes sense. I leaned on my rake and looked at him, this neighbor, who'd been watching my life unfold from his own front yard for the past 3 years. I think I've been learning to say no, I said. To things that aren't good for me, to people who don't respect my boundaries. It's harder than it sounds, but it's also incredibly freeing. Good for you, he said. It took me until I was 70 to figure that out. Wish I'd learned it sooner. Better late than never, right? Absolutely. Speaking of which, would you like to have coffee sometime? I make a pretty decent cup, and I've been meaning to ask someone about that book club you go to. I've been thinking I might enjoy something like that. I smiled, surprised by the invitation and pleased by it. I'd like that, and I'm sure Carol would be thrilled to have another member. It's a date then. Well, not a date, just coffee between neighbors. I understood, I said, amused by his flustered clarification. Just coffee between neighbors sounds perfect. That evening I called Melissa to check in. How's the career counseling going? I asked. Really well, actually. We've been talking about what I actually enjoy doing versus what I think I should enjoy doing. Turns out they're pretty different things. What do you actually enjoy? Organizing things, solving problems, helping people navigate complicated systems. The counselor thinks I might be good at project management or operations roles. That sounds like you, I said. You've always been good at seeing the big picture and figuring out how to make things work. She's helping me identify some entry-level positions where I can develop those skills. It's not as glamorous as owning a wellness center, but it feels more real. Real is good, sweetheart. Real is sustainable. Mom, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you dating anyone, Harold, maybe? I laughed. We're having coffee next week, but no, I'm not dating anyone. Why? I just wondered if you ever get lonely. Living by yourself, I mean. It was a thoughtful question, and I considered it carefully before answering. Sometimes, I said. But I've learned there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I'm alone a lot these days, but I'm rarely lonely. I have good friends. I have work that I enjoy. I have a relationship with myself that I never had when I was married. What do you mean? I mean, I like my own company now. I trust my own judgment. I don't need someone else to validate my decisions or make me feel worthwhile. That sounds nice, she said wistfully. It is nice, and it's something you can develop too, you know. Learning to be comfortable with yourself, to trust your own instincts. I'm working on it. The career counselor says a lot of my problems come from looking for external validation instead of internal clarity. Smart woman. Yeah, she is. Mom, thank you for not co-signing that loan. I know I was angry at the time, but you saved me from making a really expensive mistake. You're welcome. But Melissa, you saved yourself. You're the one who started asking the right questions. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, thinking about the conversation and the changes I'd seen in my daughter over the past month. She seemed more grounded, more thoughtful, less frantic, maybe learning to trust her own judgment instead of looking for someone else to fix her problems. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Carol. Emergency book club meeting tonight. Margaret's daughter is getting divorced and needs wine and wisdom. Can you come? I smiled and typed back, on my way, I'll bring the wine. That evening, Margaret's living room was full of women offering practical advice and emotional support to someone navigating the end of a marriage. I listened to the conversation, contributing when I had something useful to say, and felt grateful to be part of a community that showed up for each other without question. The hardest part, Margaret's daughter said at one point, is learning to make decisions by myself again. I got so used to checking everything with him that I don't trust my own judgment anymore. That comes back, I said. It takes time, but it comes back. And when it does, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. Really, you just have to practice listening to your own voice instead of everyone else's. Driving home later, I thought about voices and choices and the quiet confidence that comes from learning to trust yourself. 3 years ago, I'd been terrified of making decisions alone. Now I couldn't imagine giving that power to someone else. At home, I found a message on my answering machine from David. Linda, thanks for lunch last week. The kids called tonight, and for the first time in years, neither conversation was about money or crisis management. I think our new approach is working. I smiled and saved the message, then went to bed feeling satisfied with the day and optimistic about tomorrow. The following week brought my coffee date with Harold, which turned out to be more enjoyable than I'd expected. He was intelligent and funny, with interesting perspectives on books and current events, and he listened well without trying to fix or advise. I'd like to do this again, he said as we finished our second cups. I'd like that too. And maybe I could take you to dinner sometime. A real date this time, not just coffee between neighbors. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a kind, decent man who was offering companionship without pressure or expectations. I'd like that, I said, but I should probably mention that I'm pretty set in my ways these days. I like my independence, and I'm not looking for someone to take care of or be taken care of. Good, he said. I'm too old to change and too stubborn to be managed. I was thinking more along the lines of two independent adults who enjoy each other's company. That sounds perfect. Walking home from Harold's house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the pleasant anticipation of getting to know someone new, without the anxiety of wondering whether they'd approve of who I was or try to change me into someone else. That evening, Melissa called with news that she'd been offered an entry-level position at a non-profit that managed housing programs for low-income families. It's not glamorous, she said, but it's exactly the kind of work the career counselor thought I'd be good at. Project coordination, problem-solving, helping people navigate complicated systems. It sounds perfect for you. The pay isn't great, but it's enough to cover my expenses without borrowing money from anyone. And there's room for advancement if I prove myself. I'm proud of you, I said, for taking the time to figure out what you actually want, instead of just jumping at the first opportunity that sounded exciting. I learned that from you. Well, from watching you handle the Veronica situation, you taught me that excitement isn't the same as wisdom. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, reflecting on the month that had passed since Melissa's dramatic entrance with her business proposal. So much had changed, not just for her, but for all of us. We'd learned to have honest conversations about money and boundaries, to ask hard questions and trust our own judgment. But more than that, we'd learned that saying no to one thing creates space for better things to emerge. Melissa's willingness to walk away from a questionable opportunity had led her to discover work that actually suited her skills and values. My refusal to enable her poor decision-making had strengthened our relationship rather than damaging it. The next few weeks passed quietly, filled with the ordinary pleasures of work and friendship, and slowly deepening relationship with Harold. He took me to dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown, where we talked about books and travel, and the satisfactions of learning to live alone after decades of marriage. I never thought I'd say this, he told me over dessert, but divorce was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because my marriage was terrible, but because I never learned who I was when I wasn't trying to be what someone else needed. I know exactly what you mean, I said. I spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife and mother that I forgot there was a whole person underneath all those roles. And now I know who I am when I'm not performing for anyone else, and I like her. He smiled and reached across the table to cover my hand with his. I like her too. It was a small gesture, casual and comfortable, but it made me realize how different this felt from the intense, complicated relationships of my younger years. This was about companionship, rather than completion enjoyment, rather than need. In early December, my mother called to invite me to her Christmas party. Christmas party? Well, it's really just the bridge club plus a few other people from the building. But I thought it would be nice to have a little celebration. That sounds lovely, Mom. Can I bring anything? Just yourself. Oh, and that friend of yours if you'd like. Harold Wright Janet mentioned that you two have been spending time together. I smiled, touched by the inclusion and the acknowledgement that my life might include people she didn't know well. Thank you, I'll ask him. Good. And Linda, I wanted to tell you that I've been thinking about our conversation a few months ago about the doctor's appointments and the shuttle service. What about it? You were right to push back. I was being unreasonable expecting you to drop everything whenever I needed something. It wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't healthy for me either. Thank you for saying that. I'm learning that I'm more capable than I thought, and that I enjoy my independence more than I expected to. It was a conversation I'd hoped for, but never expected an acknowledgement that boundaries could strengthen relationships rather than damage them. The Christmas party turned out to be delightful. 20 people from my mother's building gathered in the community room, sharing food and stories and laughter. Harold charmed everyone with his stories about his years as a high school principal, and my mother glowed with pride as she introduced me to her friends. Your daughter is lovely, I heard one woman tell her. You raised her well. She raised herself mostly, my mother replied. I just tried not to get in the way. It was the kind of generous comment that my mother rarely made, and it meant more to me than she probably realized. Driving home that evening, Harold and I talked about families and expectations and the gifts that come with learning to see our relationships clearly. "Your mother seems genuinely happy," he said. "Not just pleasant or polite, but actually content." "I think she is. I think we all are in different ways." "What changed?" I thought about it as we pulled into my driveway. "I think we all stopped trying to control each other and started trusting each other to make good decisions. It's amazing how much energy that frees up for actually enjoying each other's company." "Wise words," he said and leaned over to kiss me goodnight. It was a gentle kiss, warm and unhurried, and it made me feel hopeful about the possibilities that lay ahead. Over the holidays, I had dinner with David and our kids, not the tense obligatory gathering of previous years, but a relaxed evening of conversation and laughter. Melissa talked enthusiastically about her new job, and our son Brett shared updates about his recovery program and his plans to return to school. "This feels different," David said as we were cleaning up after dinner. "What feels different?" "All of us together. More honest somehow. Less like we're all trying to manage each other's emotions. Maybe that's what happens when people start taking responsibility for their own lives, instead of expecting other people to fix their problems." Maybe so. As the new year approached, I found myself reflecting on the changes that had unfolded over the past few months. Learning to say no had indeed been difficult, but it had also been transformative. Not just for me, but for everyone in my orbit. Melissa was thriving in her new job, having discovered that she had genuine talent for project management and a deep satisfaction in helping families find stable housing. She called regularly, but our conversations were about sharing news rather than managing crises. My mother had become more independent and socially engaged, building friendships and taking on small leadership roles in her building's community activities. Our relationship had evolved from caregiver-dependent to something more mutual and respectful. David and I had found our way to a co-parenting partnership that worked better than our marriage ever had, united by love for our children, but no longer burdened by the weight of unmet expectations. And Harold had become a regular and welcome presence in my life, someone who enhanced my contentment rather than filling a void. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment and enjoy my own company. The woman who had been so terrified of making decisions alone 3 years ago had been replaced by someone who relished her independence and felt confident in her choices. One evening in late January, I was reading by the fireplace when my phone rang. It was Melissa calling with what had become our weekly check-in. "How was your week?" she asked. "Good. Productive. I helped a young couple find their first house, had dinner with Harold, went to book club. How about you?" "Great, actually. We're starting a new project at work, transitional housing for families coming out of homelessness. I'm going to be the project coordinator." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. It sounds like exactly the kind of work you're meant to do." "It is. And Mom, I wanted to thank you again for not co-signing that loan last fall. If I'd gotten involved with Veronica, I never would have found this job or figured out what I actually want to do with my life. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe it just would have taken longer and cost more. Maybe, but I'm grateful it happened the way it did." After we hung up, I sat by the fire for a while, thinking about paths taken and not taken, about the unexpected gifts that sometimes emerge from difficult decisions. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, still learning to live alone, still uncertain about my own judgment, still struggling to balance love for my family with healthy boundaries. And I thought about the woman I was now, confident in my independence, clear about my values, surrounded by relationships that nourished rather than depleted me. The journey from people-pleasing to self-respect had been harder than I'd expected, but also more rewarding. Learning to say no had indeed opened up space for better things to say yes to. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their poor choices, even when that refusal feels harsh in the moment. This is a dramatized story created for entertainment and inspiration, not medical, legal, or financial advice.